Hi everybody, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ditte Laursen. I'm head of Department for Digital Cultural Heritage at the Royal Danish Library. I'll talk about developing legal agreements. First, I'll introduce the archive and the different forms of access that we provide. Then I'll address the legal framework within which we can operate and the way that we explored this framework and implemented it in order to create agreements with users. And finally, I'll highlight some of the challenges that we have faced along the way and still face, and share some key learning points. So, access to the archive. Let me first introduce the archive. This is one of the copies, and we collect the web as part of our country's legal deposit legislation. So that is websites on .dk and other Danish websites, and we have around 700 terabytes right now. We provide access for researchers affiliated with a Danish research institution, and we also provide access for researchers not affiliated with a Danish research institution, but then only on-site access. The services we provide are URL search and full text search, and our newest service is data on demand. In terms of infrastructures, the URL and the full text search is provided by the library, whereas the data set is copied and extracted from the archive and handed over to the researcher to be used at the researcher's own infrastructure at his or her home institution. And the reason I mention this is because the legally binding agreements to explain the terms and conditions of the relationship between the library and the user are different in these two different situations. So, two different agreement forms. The legal framework for the two forms are actually completely the same. So the same law applies, the Legal Deposit Law, the Copyright Act, and the Data Protection Act. And these are the centerpieces of the laws. So material published in electronic networks can be used for research, and personal data can be processed for scientific or statistical purposes. And the use are on non-commercial terms. It means that the use must not compete with commercial enterprises, and if the material can be acquired on ordinary commercial terms, the access cannot be granted. While the legal framework is the same, the implementation of the framework differs slightly in the two agreements, but there are also some similarities. So similarities are there has to be a research purpose. There can be no use of data which can be required on ordinary commercial terms. So that's the same. But when it comes to access, the wording differs. So when using the library's research infrastructure, the password is personal and cannot be passed on to a third party. But when using the university's research infrastructure, the applicant is responsible for ensuring that the material is not used in any other context or for any other use than the research project. So the legal background for this is, of course, the same, but the differences reflect the differences in context and the shift of responsibility. And it's actually spelled out explicitly in this way. So the applicant bears the responsibility for ensuring that suitable technical and organizational security precautions are in place to prevent the data being accidentally or illegally disclosed to any unauthorized third party or in any other manner processed in violation of the GDPR. So, of course, the library has the same responsibility when the user are using the library's research infrastructure, but it isn't part of the agreement with the user. The information we require also differs slightly in the two agreements, but there are also similarities. So we do need a project description, including a research purpose. And this is for us the most critical part of the application, because it's on the basis of that that we evaluate whether or not access can be granted. And then for practical purposes, we need the project period and the destination to where the data should be delivered. And for the delivery of data sets, we also require a signature from the head of department of the researcher. It's an extra precaution on our part, but it also protects the researcher, as he is not the only responsible. So challenges and learnings. So legal challenges. One challenge is that the laws mention research, scientific and statistical purpose, but there are no definitions of what that actually means. So gray areas that we have encountered are journalists doing research. So when does journalistic work qualify as research? Another gray area is education, like a very gifted master student doing his master thesis. Can that be research? Possible. Balancing responsibility can also be a challenge. So when a researcher is using the library's infrastructure, the library is responsible for a secure infrastructure, and we log the use of the data because we are accountable. But when we hand over data sets to a researcher and a research institution, then there's a shift of responsibility, and the legal liability is placed at the research institution. But are we as a library then completely off the hook and have no responsibility whatsoever? I don't think so. So also the delivered data, when we hand out data set, they has to be deleted after use, after the project period has run its course. But what about derived data? Sometimes derived data are research results, like the number of domains or the number of images, and that is of course fine, and that can be kept. It shouldn't be deleted. But how about a list of URLs? Then it becomes slightly more problematic. So the law says as long as the derived data contains data that are protected by copyright or includes personal data, then it should be deleted. But when it comes to derived data, it's not always black and white. Organizational challenges. So ensuring the skills, a sufficient level of competences. So ensuring the skills and knowledge that are essential in order for the curators in frontline to do their job appropriately. For instance, the skill of being able to determine if an activity can be considered research, even though they are not researchers themselves. And to be able to explain to users the legal terms of the services provided, even though they themselves are not legal advisors. And for us as an organization, we need to balance a generic service such as data on demand with researchers' individual needs. So the demands differ in nature, of course they do. And in one case, we used 60 hours of support for one researcher, while 8 hours was sufficient in other cases. So the level of service has also to be determined. Thirdly, for us as an organization, to create a culture of systematic documentation of user needs and applying these insights into service developments. So this data on demand service is actually completely user-driven in the sense that end users have been instrumental in identifying and formulating the need for this service. And we as a library, as an organization, we should be able to pick up on such needs. And this is also a key learning point. So users' needs change over time, of course they do. And when they challenge the organizational facilitation of interaction between archives and users, these insights can be applied into service interventions with considerable potential. So 15 years ago, there were no demands for datasets on demand. Today there is, and there has been for a while. Accordingly, legal barriers can and should be explored on a continuous basis. So exploration and persistence while users' needs and we as an organization evolve have the potential to inform and advance future conceptual developments. So all along, for 15 years, the legal framework has been the same. So what changed? We can now deliver data sets to researchers. Well, something changed, and eventually it took only 15 hours of legal counsel to clarify the terms of the data deliveries and draw up the agreement. Thank you.